Communication Standardization Bureau of the ITU. I'll be co-hosting this event with my colleague, Walter Nissler, Chief of Section, Senior Economic Affairs Officer at UNECE. Welcome to this year's Future Networked Car Symposium, jointly organized by the ITU and UNECE. This year's event will be fully digital for the first time. It will run for 3 hours per day over 4 consecutive days from 22 to 25 March. I'm very pleased to see so many participants connected today, and I look forward to your active participation during our discussions. I invite you to drop a quick message in the chat box with your name and the country from which you're connected today. We are very privileged to have 3 distinguished dignitaries open FNC-21. Mr. Hulin Zhao, Secretary General of the ITU, Ms. Olga Algayarova, Executive Secretary of UNECE, and Mr. Jean Todt, UN Secretary General's Special Envoy for Road Safety and President of FIA. Without further delay, I'd like to invite Mr. Hulin Zhao, Secretary General of the ITU, to give us his opening remarks. Hulin.
Okay, thank you very much, Pilar. Experts, participants, partners, and our friends. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome you to this symposium on future network car. We're talking about a future network car. We're not talking about the virtual network car. But unfortunately, we cannot meet together physically this year. But let me just begin by thanking our co-organizer, UNECE. Our partners with UNECE is key in making this possible. I'm pleased to welcome my colleague, Olga Algayarova, UNECE Executive Secretary and Under-Secretary General of UN. I'm glad to welcome my dear friend, Jean Todt, President of FIA, and the UN Secretary General's Special Envoy for Road Safety. I thank you for your long-standing support to this event and the unique perspective that you bring to our discussions. This year marks the 16th edition of this event. I've been pleased to see more and more intelligent transport entering our daily lives and more report on the testing of automated driving in cities around the world. We are not that far anymore. We are moving towards automated driving, our theme this year. Electrification has gathered significantly momentum, and new business models are emerging, many of them pioneering new shared mode of transport. The automotive and ICT industries and the many new market segments emerging at their intersection find themselves in need of common platforms for growth and innovation. In other words, common standards. International standards help us to deploy new technologies efficiently and at scale. We are building new partnerships, and we are reinforcing this partnership by working together in supporting standards efforts. That is why the ITU membership now includes Volkswagen Group and Hyundai, and a diverse range of other automotive industry players, such as RoadDB, China's telematics industry application alliance, Continental, Bosch, BlackBerry, Tata Communications, and Mitsubishi Electric. ITU standards provide for high quality and high security communication in the intelligent transport context. We also have 2 ITU focus groups leading pre-standardization studies of driving tests for artificial intelligence and next generation vehicle infotainment systems. New technology success in improving road safety will depend on their success in gaining public trust. This week, we will discuss the technical business and regulatory actions required to build this public trust, including the new UNECE regulations on cybersecurity, UN Regulation 155, and software updates, UN Regulation 156. Working in a partnership for more than 10 years, ITU and the UNECE have built productive dialogue between our respective communities, helping ITU to develop technical standards in support of vehicle regulations. On Friday, we will host a meeting of the collaboration on ITS communication standards. All standards bodies relevant to intelligent transport will be represented. This open platform was conceived in 2011, but however, 1TS concept already came to us in 1990s when I was counselor for CCITT, ITUT study groups together with ISO-IEC. We talked about ITS. But this now continues to grow in importance. We all draw great strengths from this partnership-oriented initiative. They are essential in clarifying our respective rules in supporting emerging fields of innovation. We are looking towards 2030 and the achievement of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Partnerships are growing in importance. Working together, playing to our unique strengths, we can achieve breakthroughs capable of creating very meaningful improvements in the quality of life enjoyed by billions of people worldwide. We see extraordinary opportunities to achieve these breakthroughs in mobility. I thank you all for your resolve to make this happen. Let me conclude by thanking our Symposium Steering Committee and the moderators for arranging an excellent program, as well as our generous sponsors, Qualcomm and Experian. Year after year, this event attracts an expert audience deeply invested in this discussion. It is a great pleasure to welcome you all, and I wish you a most enjoyable event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zhao, Secretary General of ITU, for your inspiring words. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Walter Nissler, Chief of Vehicle Regulations Section at UNECE, and I'm very excited to this 16th edition of the Symposium of the Future Network Car, which the ITU and UNECE are co-organizing for so many years. Before I give the floor to our second distinguished dignitary, let me remind all of you that to attend each day of this year's symposium, a separate registration is needed. So kindly make sure you are registered to each session for which you are planning to attend this week. Having reminded all about this important administrative aspect, I'm very pleased to give the floor to Ms. Olga Algalarova, Executive Secretary of UNECE and Under Secretary General of UN, for her opening remarks.
Thank you very much, dear Walter, and good afternoon. First of all, Secretary General of ITU, my dear colleague Holin, then UNSG's Special Envoy on the Road Safety, my dear colleague and friend Jean Todt, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, welcome warmly to this symposium on the future network car, which brings together key stakeholders to discuss the future of connected vehicles. It's a pleasure to be with you today. We met a year ago when the Geneva Motor Show was cancelled, only days before strict sanitary measures were implemented here in Geneva and all around our region. And 2020 was disruptive for mobility. We learned from our observatory on border crossing status that due to COVID-19, the international transport of goods was severely impacted. And this is why transport ministers from all over the world agreed on a ministerial resolution calling for enhancing resilient inland transport connectivity in emergency situations, adopted just last month during the 83rd session of the UNECE Inland Transport Committee. And this is the United Nations' only regulatory body specializing in road, rail, inland, waterway, and intermodal transport. The COVID-19 related disruptions affected the transport of passengers and persons. The mobility of persons dropped by as much as 30% in some countries of the UNECE region. And this came with some short-term benefits, such as encouraging progress on road safety figures in some cities and countries, not speaking about some environmental pressures. Some of these short-term benefits can be extended to the medium and long term. And for that to succeed, we must not return to business as usual. To recover better, we must consider working in smarter and more connected ways. While our need to remain mobile remains, we need to ensure that we do so efficiently with more reliability and safety than ever before. In plain words, a better, more sustainable recovery. 2020 has also been a productive year for the automated and connected vehicles community. The Waymo autonomous taxi service has opened operating in 2 suburbs of Phoenix, Arizona in the United States since October 2020. While Honda announced that they would sell the first level 3 automated sedan car in 2021. And you may remember that repeated calls of G7 transport ministers in recent years to accelerate the work of the UNECE World Forum for Harmonization of Vehicle Regulations on automated vehicles. UNECE responded to this and facilitated the creation of the Working Party on Automated, Autonomous and Connected Vehicles, or GRVA for short, which is now led by Germany, China and Japan. The group made progress under the framework of the 1958 agreement, the International Type Approval Framework. I'm pleased to say that 3 UN regulations dealing with automated and connected vehicles entered into force in January 2021. They form the initial package dealing with level 3 regulations of automated and connected vehicles. And as I just mentioned, Honda stated that they started offering the first level 3 vehicle for sale this year in full compliance with UN regulation number 157 on the automated lane keeping system, ALKS for short. We expect other manufacturers to do the same soon. The regulations are in place and some activities are already on their way. Further progress is being made on the regulatory side of automated vehicle type approval by exploring other vehicle categories such as trucks, higher speeds, and lane changes. We observed a number of stakeholders, including startups, small and medium-sized companies involved in cybersecurity, communicating their interest and readiness to deal with the cybersecurity of vehicles in collaboration with the automotive sector. It has been forecasted that investment in cybersecurity will soar in the coming years as cyber attacks against countries and companies persist. Although UNECE's regulations will not prevent cyber attacks, they will oblige manufacturers to be aware of the vulnerabilities of their products, monitor and report attacks to the authorities and respond to them appropriately. The research and development and standardization of vehicle connectivity activities started over a decade ago, but such features are still not available in all new road vehicles. Common issues in telecommunications such as latencies, interference and coverage are obstacles we must still tackle in order to make connected vehicles a reality. It is important at this stage that we move our bilateral exchanges to more multilateral technical discussions. The 3 UN regulations now in force are an achievement which is relevant for countries applying the type approval regime. But some notable partners don't rely on type approval and are not part of the 1958 agreement. Countries such as the United States and Canada, being contracting parties to the 1998 agreement, support the self-certification system. And therefore, the GRVA Working Party engaged in a global initiative that involves not only the many parties of the 1958 agreement, but also with those countries who are not yet using the type approval regime. And this is what we will explore this afternoon with the leaders involved in this initiative. The speakers will explain us their activities on performance requirements and the safety evaluation of automated driving systems, and provide us with updates on event data recorders and data storage systems for automated driving. Tomorrow in session 2, you will also learn more on the cybersecurity aspect. UNECE and its relatively new working party on automated, autonomous and connected vehicles showed its capability to work fast, always keeping safety and security as the first priority, with more than 8 informal working groups reporting back. Working hard on technical and legal matters never prevents them from thinking about the future and possible reforms. You will see more of this in the second session this afternoon, when they will debate the appropriateness of the tried and trusted approaches for standards and regulations suitable for a digital future. Let us now hear from our distinguished speakers and panelists. Thank you all for contributing and for participating in today's roundtable. And in conclusion, I wish you all a connected day, and may the outcome of these discussions help us in recovering better for our shared future.
Thank you very much, UNECE Executive Secretary, for your encouraging remarks and for fostering this excellent collaboration with the ITU. Moving forward to our third dignitary today, I would like to welcome a very popular worldwide leader who is a champion in so many ways. Let me just mention that it was under his leadership that Michael Schumacher won 5 consecutive World Drivers' Championships with Ferrari about 20 years ago. Today, Mr. Jean Todt, President of FIA, is also the UN champion on road safety. I'm honored to invite Mr. Jean Todt to give us his opening remarks. Jean, over to you.
Thank you, my dear friends, Olga Gayerova and Ulin Zhao, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I am absolutely delighted to join you again this year for the Symposium on the Future Network Car. I really thank the ITU and the UNECE for continuing to bring attention to this important topic. We have been discussing about the future network car for many years now, and the long-standing vision of self-driving vehicles, seamless, automated, connected mobility, which we have yet to see in wide-scale practice. Some skeptics of these efforts have argued that connected automated vehicles are just a solution looking for a problem. What significant value do they bring to the market, and how will they address our existing problems? It has been a disruptive year for the mobility world, as we all know. The movement on our roads dropped by around 30% in many cities around the world. There have been huge changes in mobility patterns and demands. As COVID-19 given the connected automated vehicle industry a renewed resonance, the opportunity to contribute to building a new mobility ecosystem, in terms of its role to address the new mobility demands and to regain consumer trust, I would say yes. In terms of solving the global road safety challenge, I have yet to be convinced. Due to rising COVID-19 health concerns, and changing commuting patterns, demand among private consumers for personal cars is increasing and share rides seems to be out. Change in shopping habits with a greater focus on e-commerce are shifting the landscape for both retail and logistics. And it is driving demand for logistics and delivery services. A European market research firm reported that 54% of survey respondents indicated they plan to increase online spending permanently, while 28% plan to durably reduce visits to physical stores. Companies will have to quickly increase their operating capacity to meet demand. Autonomous vehicles could be an attractive option to fill these gaps. They could help to increase delivery network capacity, reduce costs, and comply with social distancing measures. The booming e-commerce sales, resulting surge in investments and greater involvement from logistic companies could speed up delivery of autonomous commercial vehicles. Investments inflows from logistic companies could help automotive manufacturers unlock more resources for new technologies. It could finally pave the way for a mass rollout of connected automated vehicles in filling both the personal and commercial demands. The likelihood that we may face similar global pandemics in future gives precedents to prepare for an increased role of connected automated vehicles. Using data from the COVID-19 experience will help us understand where the industry could play a stronger role. Where did transport workers suffer the greatest risk exposure? Which communities experience food or grocery shortages? Where were essential worker transportation compromised? Where did vital medical supply chains break down? How do we provide mobility services that address the fears of contamination among mobility users and potentially data increase in private car ownership? We should determine how we might develop flexible, connected, and automated vehicle services that could address this and other challenges. This could be the basis for further development, regulation, and rollout that we have been long waiting for. While the progress of development to date has been rapid, AV technologies remain largely unproven for many operators. Regulatory initiatives vary significantly from hands-off guidance with no formal permitting program to structured performance evaluations. Moreover, most policies that exist today are only temporary measures to enable testing. Therefore, it is essential that policymakers engage with the industry, creating a shared framework for deployment and with users to get feedback on acceptability of the system. I've always argued that automated connected vehicles are far from being the solution in the communities that are most affected by road traffic crashes. The infrastructure in many countries will not support automated vehicles for the near future. The cost of the technology is still very high. In 2021, we are starting a second UN Decade of Action for Road Safety with an extended target to halve the number of road deaths and injuries and to provide access to safe, affordable, accessible, and sustainable transport systems for all by 2030. We must be striving to reduce the road safety divide between developed and developing countries. We observe that some regions of the world, such as Africa and the ASEAN region, are relying more and more on the work of UNECE WP29 for updating their regulations and standards related to automotive product safety. We also have the United Nations Road Safety Fund that is supporting work in all the regions of the world, and all that are great news. However, COVID-19 has changed our projected advancements in our respective sectors and highlighted the opportunity to harness new technology. Organizations like ITU and UNECE should take advantage of this changing landscape and promote life-saving vehicle technology to those who need it most. I wish you a great meeting. And again, I'm very happy to be with you today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Todd, UN Secretary General's Special Envoy for Road Safety, to be with us today and to continue your terrific work and passionate support to road safety, aiming at reducing numbers of fatalities and injuries and at large saving lives on our road. I also wish to thank again Mr. Holinsau, ITU Secretary General, and Ms. Olga Algarayova, UNECE Executive Secretary, for being with us today. With this, today's opening ceremony is concluded. Thanks again to the speakers. Now, with no delay, I wish to invite the moderator of session 1 to kick off the first session of the symposium that will discuss regulatory advances in highly automated driving. We will have 2 subsessions there, and I'm pleased to give the floor to Mr. Richard Damm, Chair of the UNECE Working Party 29 Working Group on Automated, Autonomous and Connected Vehicles, GRVA, to tell us about this first session. Let me quickly introduce Mr. Damm, who is the President of the Federal Motor Transport Authority of Germany. Before being appointed President, he served at the Federal Ministry of Transport and Digital Infrastructure in Berlin. Among numerous other tasks, he was responsible for the introduction of market surveillance of motor vehicles in Germany. As internationally recognized expert, he is also a member of the board of directors of the Euro NCAP program, which is a consumer information program on the safety of new vehicles. Before joining the ministry in Germany, Mr. Damm spent 5 years working on national and European research projects at the Federal Highway Research Institute of Germany. And his background is as a mechanical engineer in automotive engineering, and he studied at the Technical University of Munich. Mr. Damm, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nisler. I hope you can hear me. Before I start with session 1, part A, about connected and automated driving, I'd like to inform you about some housekeeping issues. So first of all, you should be aware that also presentations will be made available after the event. So this will be it will be possible to download the presentations from the ITU website. And secondly, this webinar is going to be recorded, and the recording will be made available on the website as well. An important note for you is that we do have chat functions for this event, and there are 2 different chat functions. One chat function is for the administrative items, and another chat function is for the Q&A, for the question and answers. So if you have any question during this event, either part A or part B, you can use the Q&A chat function to put the questions in writing in this chat function, and then it will be answered later on during the event. So I'm now coming to the event itself. So it's a pleasure for me to act as a moderator for this part A of this session, and the session 1 is called Regulatory Advances in Highly Automated Driving. And as we heard already from the 3 distinguished dignitaries, it is utmost to drive safety in the right direction, and with regard to safety, automation and connectivity is key. That's why the UNECE WP29 has introduced a new working group some years ago, the GRVA working group, and I have the honor to lead this working group. And today, several colleagues are with me to present the work of this GRVA, and it will be a pleasure for me to introduce four colleagues. First of all, we have Mr. Lagrange, who is working for the European Commission in the European Union, and he's a team leader on automotive and mobility industry, and works especially in the field of safety and automation. And he will report to you about the activities related to type approval issues. And then we have three more colleagues, Mrs. Chen from China, Mr. Onoda from Japan, and Mrs. Doherty from the United States of America, who will further present the work, the broad work of the GRVA with regard to the global activities on automation and connectivity. I think a few sentences with regard to the work that is done by GRVA. I think it's the first time that we have set up an activity that is carried on by all countries, or most of the countries around the globe, who are part of the UNECE family. And that's important to know, as there are differences between the different regimes around the world, as we heard already during the first speeches today, the type approval regime and the self-certification regime. And what we are trying to do now in GRVA is to draft requirements, to draft provisions that can be used for both regions. Regions who are mainly working with the type approval regime, and other regions who are working mainly with the self-certification regime. That's not easy, but that's what we are trying to do at the moment. And the speed is very high, and we try to catch up with the speed that is going on in the development of the technology. So let me come to the first presentation now of Mr. Lagrange. So as I mentioned before, he's team leader in the automotive and mobility industries unit at the European Commission, and he's particularly responsible for vehicle safety. And most of you will know him. He has a long experience, and since 2001, he's working in the automotive regulation field on the national, European, and international level. He is at the UNECE known as an expert in different working groups, and he's currently the co-chair of the informal working group of automated braking systems, automated emergency braking systems, and he is also the co-chair of the newly introduced task force on driver assistance systems. And I would like to give the floor now to Mr. Lagrange. Anthony, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Richard. I hope you can hear me and see me. We are still working from home here in Brussels. So thank you very much for the introduction. I was just wanted to check with the ITU Secretariat whether they could launch my presentation. I recorded as a video just to be sure that things go well with the presentation. So I will stop speaking here, let the video go on, and then take back some questions if there are any.
Okay, I think we do have maybe a technical problem in getting the presentation from Mr. Lagrange shown. I don't know if the organizers can inform us if there is a technical problem.
Hi, I guess my colleague Gifty is not able to show this video for some reason. Can maybe Mr. Lagrange try with his computer whether that works?
Yes, I can try. Just tell me, how do I share my screen?
There is a green button just below your screen.
Ah, yes. I hope you will have the sound as well. My video. Okay. So just tell me if you have sounds as well.
No sound, no video for the moment.
Ah, c'est bien. Okay. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, now we see your screen.
Okay. I could hear the video myself, but apparently you couldn't. So, okay, let's make another try. Otherwise, I will just go live. Can you see the video now?
We see the PowerPoint, I think.
Okay, look, I'm going to do it live then. Sorry for that. Should be this one. Is it working now?
Still no video. It seems to be slides.
Yeah, it's slides with sounds. Huh? This is what it is.
There is no sound.
Okay, let me do it.
Anthony Lagrange from the European Commission, and I'm going to talk about automated driving in the EU.
That's okay now.
Okay.
First of all, a quick reminder on how automated driving issues are dealt at the EU level. So we deal with product safety, mostly at EU level. So it means that vehicle approvals or other issues like product liabilities are managed at the EU level, whereas for some other issues like liability or traffic rules, this is mostly managed by our member states. For automated driving, it means, for instance, that experimentations are mostly covered by national legislation, and the same applies to traffic rules, which are managed by the member states with some harmonization at the EU level. At the EU level, regarding regulatory issues, we have a system that is called EU type approval, which means that a vehicle is certified, and once it is certified, it can be registered everywhere in the EU. This legislation is fully harmonized at EU level. One very important aspect is that we decided in 2009 to repeal many of our EU texts and to replace them by UN regulations. So there is a strong link with discussion in the United Nations for the technical rules that apply in the EU for vehicles. This is a third-party certification, so it means that the manufacturer has to go through a third party to get his certification before the vehicle can be placed on the market. Last but not least, we cover market surveillance of products. This is a new evolution. It's starting already now in September 2020, but this is an important aspect also for automated driving. So regarding the EU approach on automated driving, we adopted a strategy back in 2018. This strategy has several pillars. One is to build a common vision, so identify the most relevant use cases for automated driving in the different member states. Second, we foresee a number of large-scale testing on the road. And the idea of this large-scale testing is that it will fuel the regulatory discussions. We then go with a progressive approach, starting with EU guidelines, but we also want to reach a new legal system for automated driving. I will go through the different steps that are listed here in the next slides. So on the regulatory side, as I said, we started with guidelines at EU level. One of the ideas was to promote innovation through the use of exemption for the EU type approval. The idea, this is an existing framework, the idea is that manufacturer may have some exemptions for technologies that are not covered by the present legislation. And these exemptions will be recognized in the whole EU level. To harmonize the practice of the member states regarding these exemptions, we actually drafted some guidelines. These guidelines have been supported by the member states on the 12th of February 2019. This is publicly available. I put here the link to the guidelines. What is important is that despite these guidelines, no requests for exemptions for vehicles of level 3 and 4 have been failed or have been asked by a manufacturer until now, which means that, for instance, in terms of maturity of the technology, it seems that we are still, or at least we were still until very recently, in the stage of experimentation and not going to commercial activities with these vehicles. We didn't stay at the level of guidelines, but we also prepared the future with the adoption of a new legislation. This new legislation was proposed by the Commission in May 2018, and it had several purposes. One was to give a critical mass to driver assistance systems. So there are a number of driver assistance systems that have been made mandatory in the EU legislation. The second purpose was to provide the legal framework for connected and automated driving. This legislation was endorsed by the legislator and agreed on the 26th of March 2019, and it will become applicable from mid-2022. The text is also available here with the link. And basically now we are developing on this basis the technical requirements that are necessary for implementing this legislation. The target, there are several steps in the regulation, but the target is to have the technical measures for Q1 next year. And we are working full speed on this objective now. On this slide, you have the state of play of the drafting of the different technical measures. So you will see the different phases for implementation of the general safety regulation and the state of play of the different measures. Many of them are quite advanced. I will not go into the details of all these measures, but if you want to check where are we with the different measures, you can easily check it here. All the drafting texts are publicly available, so if you are looking for one text, you can of course contact me and I will give you the link to the different texts that are on the table. An important aspect, of course, is that some of these texts are actually based on UN regulations. So this is where you see the flag of the United Nations here. So once again, we rely quite a lot on the United Nations for drafting the technical rules on vehicles in the EU. On this slide, I'm presenting the EU approach for automated driving. So for us, it's very clear that with these kind of complex systems, we cannot rely on a few number of tests that will demonstrate safety. We need a much more comprehensive approach. It means, for instance, that we will look more at what was done by the manufacturer to address the relevant risk. We like to check the safety concept that he put in place and the development that he did, so to ensure that he sufficiently covered the different kind of scenarios that may happen. This concerns traffic scenarios, but also human-machine interface, for instance, or perception problem, cybersecurity or failures. We'll also test the vehicles so that we are able to check a number of capabilities. So capabilities meaning, is the vehicle able to drive safely, or is the vehicle able to avoid some critical crashes. Last but not least, I think it's very clear that with these complex systems, whatever assessment is done before market introduction, we will only be sure about the safety level of these vehicles once they are in a sufficient number on the road and once they are confronted with a sufficient number of driving conditions. So for us, what is very important is to have a feedback loop on the kind of events that may happen on the road concerning the vehicle safety. So what is behind is some reporting by the manufacturer that these vehicles indeed you can confirm that the level of safety that is on the road is what was assessed before market introduction. All these three main blocks will require new competencies from the authorities. So we are also working on these new competencies in terms of audit. The transparency of these audits is also very important so that there is an information flow across the different authorities, and also for the testing because these vehicles may have to handle very different situations. It's important that we have less fixed parameters for carrying out this testing. Regarding the level of involvement of the EU Commission and its member states in the UN, as I said, we are deeply involved because we replace many of our EU legislation by UN regulations. So for us, United Nations is very important. It's very important also because this is the car market is a global market, so it's important that we reach common legislation with the different contracting parties. So we are involved in different groups. Concerning vehicles, of course, some progress has already been made, and it's very, very good. This concerns automated lane keeping systems below 60 km/h, cybersecurity, and software updates that were all adopted last June 2020. The work is not finished. I mean, the automated lane keeping is a very limited operational design domain, so we are really counting on the UN to make progress on other use cases as well. So this is covered by the groups concerning functional requirements and the validation and assessment method for automated driving. As in our EU roadmap, we consider that the biggest priority is to further extend the operational design domain of automated lane keeping so that we cover larger use cases on the motorway. So it means higher speeds and other kind of maneuver on the motorway, such as lane change. On the traffic rules, there is also some activities there. It's mostly followed by our member states. It's very good that for vehicles with driver, we are relatively well covered under the conventions that are managed at the UN level. But there is still some work to do for fully driverless vehicles. I think for what remains to be done, what is very important is that the level of harmonization that it reached by the UN conventions is quite minimal. So it's true that a lot of aspects should still be regulated in the national traffic rules. And this is something we are really pushing our member states to do. Some of them have already done it. Others are still in the process of doing it. So clarifying what is the role of the driver, for instance, with partial automation is very important, and therefore we are really helping our member states to do their homework in this regard. That is it for my presentation. I think we already made quite good progress, both at national, regional, and UN level. We still have a lot of work in front of us, especially for this higher level of automation. And indeed, I think that one of the main means that we have to work together on that is the framework that is set out by the United Nations with the World Forum on Automotive Regulation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anthony, for this presentation. And once again, apologies to the audience for these technical problems at the beginning. But I hope you have been able to follow the presentations, and you were able to hear and understand everything due to the fact that the sound was not very high, but I hope this still was okay. Thank you once again, Anthony. So we are waiting for questions until the end of this session 1A. So we are coming now to the next presentation, and it's a pleasure to invite Mrs. Junmei Chen from China. She's working for the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology, and she's responsible for the domestic standards as well as regulations on the international level. She's well known at the UNECE WB29, and she works already for several years as a co-chair to the informal working groups on electrical vehicle safety and the environmental group on battery electric vehicles. She is also vice chair of GRVA and co-chair to the informal working group FRAV, working on the functional requirements for automated vehicles. And Mrs. Chen will introduce the work of the informal working group FRAV today. So, Junmei-san, the floor is yours.
Hello everyone. Could you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Richard Dam. Thank you for having me, and my pleasure to be here to share the information on our informal working group of FRAV. Oh, thank you. And before I start my presentation, could I ask the secretary to share the presentation materials on the screen for me? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I will start now. So could you move to the next page? Okay, thank you. And first, I want to give an overall introduction of our FRAV informal working group. And here for the group, we have leadership from China and myself, and we also have the co-chair from the United States of America, Mr. Inaza, and our moderator today, Richard Germany. Of course, we have our secretariat, which is John Kramer from American Automotive Policy Consult. And both the other co-chairs and the secretariat did a lot of work on our informal working group of FREV. So thanks for their effort today, given this opportunity. You know, as the informal working group, FREV will report to GRVA as well as close connection with the other informal working group under GRVA, that is WEMAT, which will be introduced later in details. And then you can see this slides here. Before I move to the detailed work of FREV, there's a concept I need to mention today. That is ADS. You know, ADS by definition must be capable of performance all the DDT functions, but each ADS may differ based on the ODD of its features and the means used to perform the DDT functions. And the present challenge for ADS is that we should consider vehicle life cycle safety of software and data-driven systems operating in complex environments. That's quite a challenge for us. As you know, that also mentioned by Mr. Lachlan just now, WP29 have adopted an UN regulation R115/7 on ALKS, which drafted by the former ACSF group. ALKS is an ODD specific application of level 3 ADS technologies, where the systems are designed for use by a driver in the vehicle and limited to operating on divided highways. While FREV and WEMAT are considering all applications of ADS, which the aim to provide a framework for ensuring safety as ADS technologies and application evolved and merged into more advanced systems. FREV and WEMAT are addressing all applications of ADS technologies. Between them, FREV focus on the requirement of ADS, where high-level requirement or detailed requirement, and WEMAT focus on the assessment method, which is used to support the implementation of the requirements. Therefore, in combination, FREV and WEMAT would provide a general guideline for ADS requirement and validation method. The two groups have a close cooperation with each other to inform the work in progress and also discuss the future activities. The next page, please. Now we move to the objective of our group. FREV is pursuing safety requirements applicable across all ADS technologies, from system interact with or activated by a human driver to vehicles without any driver controls. The requirement should meet 6 criteria. The requirements should result in improved road safety and efficiency. They should be performance-based and should not interfere with innovation. The specification should be objective, verifiable, and attainable given the current state of technology progress. Lastly, the requirement should result in ADAS performance that meet public expectation for vehicle behavior and safety. With a top-down approach, FREV have designed 5 broad categories from which to develop the safety requirement. And here we have 4 aspects of requirement. First, the ADAS should drive safety. In other words, ADAS should drive the vehicle in a manner consistent with safe driving behavior and the expectation of occupants and other road users. Secondly, ADAS are designed for human use and therefore need to interact safely with the various categories of vehicle uses and avoid misuse by design. Secondly, like control everything that happens on roadways, ADAS should interact safely with other users, but be designed to manage situations knowing to arrive in the traffic. Fourthly, as complex technologies, ADAS should be able to detect damage or system malfunctions and response appropriately. Lastly, motor vehicles can last 20 years or more. ADAS capabilities can be improved or expanded through software updates during the life of the vehicle. A system could even become obsolete or unserviceable late in the vehicle life. This objective provides the framework for developing safety specifications for ADAS. Next page, please. Thank you. The biggest challenge I can say facing FREV can be summarized in one word: diversity. In terms of the technology, we knew that ADAS technology can be applied in a wide standardization. The means used to perform DDT functions will likely differ. For example, in the to monitor the driving environment. Therefore, we will need each manufacturer to provide information about each ADAS configuration. In order to understand each ADAS and apply the step requirement description of an ADAS, FREV have further elaborated more specific aspects. With this level of detail, FREV is using these 40 elements as the basis for defined verifiable performance specifications. Next page, please. Lastly, I will talk about the work we will have for the near future. In order to elaborate the ADAS description and performance requirement, FREV will be looking at 3 aspects in the immediate future. What are the functions that make up the dynamic driving task. The basic meaning of the DTT, for example, vehicle control, object and event detection and response, and signaling. Understood, but the 40 safety aspects suggest rooms for further exploration. FRAV needs to ensure that ADS integrate all the necessary functions and respond to safety to potential failures in the mean used to perform the functions. Who are the ADS uses and what roles and responsibilities do they have? An ADS user may be a qualified driver, a passenger, a user near the vehicle, a user in a remote operation center, and so on. ADS may be designed to give users various measures of control. All the vehicle may be designed only to transport passengers, or only goods with no human occupants. FRAV needs to be clear about who these are, the safety and information needs, risk of misuse, and other aspects that differ depending upon the nature of the user's rules and responsibilities. Who and what other road users will interact with ADS vehicles? ADS will interact with the pedestrians, cyclists, the disabled, police, immersion vehicles, animals, and other ADS vehicles, including vehicles designed to share information. FRAV needs to assess each category in order to understand specific needs and ways ADS can safely address these needs. This short-term work will provide the basis for the further elaboration of specific, verifiable safety requirements during the course of this year. And that's what I want to say today for our informal working group of FRAV. Thank you. I'm not sure if there are any issues during the presentation.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Chen, for this excellent presentation. We had, unfortunately, some technical problems at the end on the last slide, where we had lost the sound for several times, and there were some interruptions. But I think people were able to follow the presentation, also looking on the slide. And what I'd like to add is that this activity of this informal working group, FRAV, is an activity that is going for a broad approach, while the first step on LKS, so the new UN regulation 157, is limited in scope, limited to specific vehicle categories, and limited to the ODD on motorways, and limited in speed. We are currently trying in FRAV to take a wider approach, where we are not limiting the scope to specific vehicle categories and also not to specific ODDs. This may be a starting point, but the idea is from the very beginning to come up with common definitions, with a common approach that is working for the different areas of vehicle automation. And we are now coming to a second important pillar of this wide approach. That's the work of the informal working group VMAT, the new validation methods for automated driving. And it is a pleasure for me to introduce Mr. Onoda from Japan. He will present the work of the informal working group. He's Senior Director of NTSEL, the National Traffic Safety and Environmental Laboratory in Japan. Before, he was a director or general director of JASIC, the Japan Automobile Standards Internationalization Center, and he also has a long experience in leading positions at the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, Transport and Tourism, in short, MLIT. And he's well known in the area of the UNECE WB29. He is chair of the informal working group IWVTA on the international whole vehicle type approval. He's vice chair of GRVA, and he's one of the co-chairs of the VMAT working group. So, Mr. Onoda, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Richardson, for your introduction. And it's my great pleasure to share some of the outcome of the informal working group on VMAT, which is working on the new assessment and test method, or NATM. So next slide, please. So as Ms. Chume-san made at her presentation, I would like to first introduce the VMAT informal working group itself. The VMAT informal working group is led by 3 co-chairs: Ibrahim Sow from Transport Canada, Peter Strickwood, RDW, the Netherlands, and myself, NTSEL, Japan. We also have 2 secretariat, William Gauss from SAE and Ryuzo Oshita from JASIC. The VMAT informal working group reports to GRVA, and we have 4 subgroups: one on scenarios, one on simulations, one on audit and monitoring, and one on track test and real world test. Next slide, please. So the not only the VMAT informal working group, but also the FRAV and DSSAD informal working group were established in response to the framework document, which was agreed by WP29s and endorsed by ITC, Inland Transport Committee. So we are working in line with the framework document, and in line with the framework document, the objective of the VMAT informal working group is to demonstrate a robust design and validation process based on the system engineering approach with the goal of designing automated driving system free of unreasonable risk and ensuring compliance with the road's traffic regulations and principles listed in that document. The framework document describes that design and validation methods should include hazard analysis and safety risk assessment for automated driving system, for the OEDR, but also for the overall vehicle design into which it is being integrated, and when applicable, for the broader transport ecosystem. The framework document also mentions that a design and validation method should demonstrate the behavioral competencies an automated autonomous vehicle would be expected to perform during normal operations, the performance during crash avoidance situations, and the performance of fallback strategies. The framework document also mentioned that test approach may include a combination of simulations, track test, and on-road testing. And it delivers new assessment and test method of automated driving system. Next, please. This slide shows the outcomes so far. Based on the framework document, VMAT has completed 3 deliverables so far. The first deliverables was the test and assessment for an automated lane keeping system, or ALKS, of level 3-4 compatible as a new UN regulation for contracting party to the 1958 agreement, which is the UN regulation 157. The second deliverables was review of the existing and upcoming method and the proposed way forward for the assessment and automated driving system. And these 2 deliverables were submitted to WP29 at its March 2020 sessions. The third deliverable was new assessment and test method of automated driving system, which was submitted to WP29 at its March 2021 session, which was held 2 weeks ago. This deliverables was submitted to WP29 as the NATM master document. So from now, I would like to briefly introduce the NATM master document. The NATM master document consolidates the work accomplished by VMAT to date to develop the NATM. It provides a clear overview of the NATM and its constituent pillars. Given the substantial technical work that is still needed to operationalize the NATM in practice, this version of the NATM master document provides a high-level framework for the NATM. And going forward, this document will be further developed and regularly updated and informed by the outcome of future VMAT sessions. And WP29 at its March 2021 sessions recommended that the NATM master document be considered by GRs and IWGs as a reference document when developing activities in the field of automation. Now, I would also like to briefly introduce the content of the NATM master document. Validating an automated driving system and its capability is a highly complex task which cannot be done comprehensively nor effectively through one validation methodologies alone. Therefore, the NATM has adopted a multi-pillar approach for the validation of ADS, which composed of a scenario catalog and 5 validation methodologies or pillars, namely simulations, track tests, real-world tests, audit, and monitoring. Scenario catalog consists of description of real-world driving situation used by the NATM pillars to validate an ADS. Simulation or virtual testing uses simulation tool change to assess an automated driving system on a wide range of virtual scenarios. Track testing uses a closed access testing ground with various scenarios elements to test an ADS, while real-world testing uses public roads to test an ADS in real traffic conditions. Audit or assessment procedures establishes how manufacturers will be required to demonstrate the capability of an ADS using documentations, their simulations, test track, real-world testing. Monitoring or in-service monitoring and reporting addresses the in-service safety of the ADS after its placing on the market. The NATM master document describes scenario catalog and each of the pillars in greater detail and explain how the NATM pillars and elements described in this document interact with each other. The NATM master document also mentions that safety requirements, which are currently being developed by FRAB group, are becoming mature enough to start considering the VMAT, NATM, and FRAB safety requirement integration, which could be incorporated in the NATM master document at a later stage. Next, please. As for the activity of the VMAT informal working group in the near future, a VMAT informal working group agreed to start with validation of NATM for highway system. VMAT and its subgroup have been working together to scope out the list of issues to be tackled as a next step, and recognizing the synergy between FRAB and VMAT informal working group, the two informal working groups will continue to collaborate in advance to advance our respective work plans. Next, please. So that's it for my brief overview of our activities of VMAT informal working group. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Onoda, for the presentation of the work of the informal working group VMAT. And it's quite interesting to see how this approach is working, this new approach for this new assessment, also with the panels. And may I remind the participants and the whole audience to put your questions in the Q&A section, in the chat function that is available on the screen, at the bottom of your screen, of the platform we are using, and there is no need to wait until the end of this session, but you can also now put your question in the chat, and these will be collected and answered at the end of the session. So, Mr. Onoda, thank you once again. And we are moving on now to the next speaker from the United States of America. It's Mrs. Jane Doherty. She's working for the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration in the US. And with her activity, she oversees the field of fuel economy and fuel efficiency standards, as well as vehicle safety standards. And she's not only promoting the US Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards implementation, but she's also working in the field of international harmonization of vehicle regulations. She has a long experience in the US administration at the Environmental Protection Agency in the US, as well as the US Department of Agriculture. And she's also familiar with activities in the field of trade agreements. She's well known at the UNECE WP29. She's co-chair of the ITS group, which is also well known here to the audience who are familiar with the ITU activities, are an important point about the intelligent transport systems. And she's co-chair of the informal working group of the event data recorder and the data storage systems of automated driving. And the floor now goes to Jane. So please.
Thank you very much, Richard. It's a pleasure to be with everyone, and a warm welcome from the United States today. It is a bright spring day here in Washington, and the only thing that would be nicer would be with all of you in Geneva enjoying the spring weather. So our apologies for not being together. It's unfortunate, but hopefully everyone is staying well and healthy. And thank you to my colleagues for their excellent presentations. Those were great. I want to share my screen and begin the presentation. I hope everyone can see it. I'm Jane Doherty. I am one of the co-chairs of this group. I am very fortunate to work with two outstanding colleagues from Japan and the Netherlands, Taro Tokai and Tim Guten from the Netherlands. The three of us work together, putting this group together. And we could not do any of our work without our outstanding secretariat, Scott Schmidt from OECA. So we're very lucky to have such a good team. This group, in the informal working group on data storage and event data recorders, is unique in the sense that we report to both GRVA and to GRSG. We work primarily on data storage activities under GRVA for automatic vehicles, but we also work on event data recorders and report directly to GRSG on our work. So our objectives in
I'm sorry, we cannot see your slides.
Oh no, I'm sorry. Let me see what's happening. Would it be possible to have the slides from Geneva?
I think so. It's happening. Just say next slide. My colleague will proceed.
Wonderful. Let's move to the next slide then. Terrific, thank you. So the objectives of our data storage systems and event data recorders is to identify differences between the two different systems and propose ways forward for both systems, making sure that we are encouraging innovative technologies, but also being very protective of national privacy concerns and interests at the national level on privacy. So it is a very difficult task trying to make sure that we're providing guidance to regulators, providing assistance and guidance to manufacturers, making sure that we are trying to stay out ahead of the technologies and where they're going, and making sure that we're also protecting individual privacy rights. So those are some of our objectives. Moving to the next slide. want to talk a little bit about what we've accomplished so far. Our group has been active since December of 2019, and we have been identifying and working at the national and regional levels, having our country and our contracting parties identify what they're working on in both event data recorders, but also data storage systems at the national, regional, and local levels, and sharing with one another best practices and our activities. We have a document that outlines what's happening at both the regional and the national levels. We keep that updated. We'll be doing another update very soon of what's happening in the respective countries. And we use our working group to share that information between us so that everyone is able to come up to speed on what the latest technologies are and what are some of the concerns that are happening. As you can imagine, there are significant differences between an event data recorder and a data storage system for an automatic vehicle. So we have put together a comparison and an identification of the differences, everything from the purpose of what the system is, what the system should not do, what the recording period should be, what the system storage capabilities of the EDR versus a DSAD for a level 3, level 4 vehicle would be, the capacity to record that data during a crash, the survivability of that data after a crash, what triggers the initiation of a data storage system, the vibrations, the malfunction detections, where we store the information is also very important, what kind of data elements you're looking for in an EDR versus a data storage system. How do you retrieve that information? How do you make sure it's accessible and it's accurate? And how often are you testing it? So those are some of the differences between a DSSAD and EDR that we've been looking at and guiding our work. Since we started, we have also put some data storage requirements together for the initial lane keeping system regulation that was put together, Regulation 157. We see that as a very good first step, but we have a lot more work to do to make sure that we are encompassing all automated driving systems. So that was the beginning of our work. We recently, earlier this month, were able to have approval from WP29 of a new UN regulation on event data recorders. This is the first regulation under the 1958 agreement only, and it will concern the EDRs, making sure that it's usable, the data is valuable for crash investigations and analysis, and it's looking at safety equipment performances. So it outlines for vehicles in categories M1 and N1, how you use an event data recorder, what are the minimum collection, storage, and crash survivability requirements in case of a crash, and how are you going to record that information. So that is the first regulation that we have put together. Again, it's only applies to the 58 agreement. It is not the global requirements or the global regulations. We also adopted a series of amendments to that regulation that are transitional in nature. In other words, today, the manufacturers may not have the capability, or they have not prepared their event data recorders to cover certain functions and elements, but they will transition in 2024 and 2026 to including additional elements and requirements under the amendments of the 01 series of amendments that are coming. And then the third document that we've been working on is a guidance document on EDRs that provides guidance to parties to the 58 as well as the 98 agreement on what elements should be in an EDR, what should they be looking for as far as accessibility, storage, et cetera. So those are the outcomes that we've had thus far. And moving on to the next slide, talk about some of the activities that will be coming up shortly. So I mentioned to you earlier, we keep a compilation of all of what's happening at the national and regional level. We also want to keep a compilation, and we're going to be putting together of best practices. What are we learning, not only from the contracting parties and the regulators, but what are we hearing from the industry? What are we hearing from some of the software experts? Because DSSAD has brought in whole nother set of experts and expertise into our group. It's not simply the conventional auto manufacturers that we're working with. We're working with a lot of folks from Silicon Valley and all over the world that are IT specialists and working with us and teaching us about their best practices. So we're trying to figure out the best way and what are some of the best practices that we can incorporate from the IT world into the auto world and working together. We're also looking at what are performance elements that are specific to automatic driving systems and how do we develop that in a DSSAD system. In our EDR working group, our subgroup on EDRs, we're looking at what are the performance elements that are appropriate for ADS equipped vehicles. We are looking in the future, one of the proposals for moving forward that we're looking at is, are we going to look at EDRs for heavy duty vehicles? That request came from our colleagues from the Commission to meet their general safety regulation mandates. And we will be looking at that and working with them to move that forward. So I'm hoping to do that shortly. And also looking at what other additional data requirements should an event data recorder contain moving forward? What are the things that we need to look at? How do we store that information? And how do we make sure that we are protecting those important privacy rights as well? So lots are happening in the group. It's been a pleasure to work with my colleagues and look forward to continuing our work on this very, very important subject. So with that, I will give the floor back to Richard, and thank you all very much for your attention.
Thank you, Jane, for your presentation of the work of the informal working group on EDR and DSSID. I think it's also an important piece of work you are carrying on for not only the automation, but for safety in general. But we are looking forward to hear more from your work, maybe next year at the Future Networked Car Symposium. And before we move to the part B of this session, which is dealing with shaping of the future. So if the current way regulations are written are appropriate for a digital future or not, we have approximately 5 to 8 minutes for questions for a discussion. We have received up to now one question from Mr. Nikolov in the Q&A chat function. So the question is how the panelists see the role of digital personal identity in the automated driving system. And is anyone from the speakers ready to answer this question?
Hello, Mr. Richard Dam. I think it's a question for me, maybe. Yeah, and I try to give any feedback on this question. And thank you for the question. And I think it's a quite a good idea, input for the role of digital personal identities. Actually, as I remember that actually in the informal working group of FRAV, we didn't mention the topic of digital personal identity. For ADS, what we discussed and focused is on the hardware and software endorsed in the system, and which is capable of performance the entire dynamic driving task. So as per my understanding, the digital personal identity is mainly the device maybe, or any kind of things maybe will reach to the usage of the vehicle. When the vehicle was introduced to the market, when the users they use the vehicle, they will need digital personal identities. identities. And as I know that there are a lot of vehicles employed to the market, they already have the SIM card or eSIM card. That will be a kind of implementation for the digital personal identities. I'm not sure my understanding is right or not. Anyway, I could bring these questions to our group of friends, and we will have the next meeting soon, and we can have this topic to be discussed in detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Chen. And I think we still have time to use the chat if your answer is not addressing the question fully. And we are coming to the next question, which goes out to the informal working group on DSSA AD and EDR. And the question is if the informal working group is considering requirements that may support advanced automatic collision notifications, like future recall, decall, OnStar, error GLONASS system, and so on. So Jane, can you answer this question?
Happy to, Richard, thank you. With regard to the specific elements that have been mentioned here, we have not yet had that discussion, but we are starting in earnest next month with our first meeting on data storage systems in about 6 months, talking about what exactly we're going to be covering. These suggestions here are very, very good and very, very important. We would like to learn more about them as well. So we will be having at least a couple of information sessions. Welcome to the participants here to share that information with us and possibly present some of that information to the group, but we have not considered that as of yet. I did want to go back to the last question though. We are struggling with how you identify the information and record the information and yet still be very, very cognizant and respectful of privacy rights. So there are, as you can imagine, different views amongst the group about how much information about the driver should be recorded and how that information, if it is recorded, how that information is available, who has access to that information. So the privacy concerns continue to be a really big challenge, particularly in the data storage area. We will be working to provide guidance to a number, obviously, of regulators and manufacturers moving forward, but we want to be mindful that there are many different views about privacy and how you store and access data and who has access to that data as well. So these are challenges that we'll be facing as moving forward. But thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Jane, for this comprehensive answer. And I think we have 3 more questions in the chat, which we will try to address quickly. So one is about LKS regulation 157. It's not part of the EU legislation at the moment. And the question is what this means. So maybe Anthony, are you in a position to give the answer to this question?
Yes, Richard, sure. So it's a typical European question, I guess, for this one. So we voted in favor of the ALKS regulation, so it applies de facto and de jure in the EU. What remains to be done is to make it mandatory for these vehicles, which we will do in the next months. That's the answer I will make.
Thank you, Anthony. And one more question from Sanjay Thakur. What considerations have been made under any regulatory framework or validation tools to account for the failure modes caused due to a machine learning-based driving software? And it seems like they're almost impossible for foreseeing and can fail even in harmless looking situations. And Mr. Onoda, are you able to give a few information about this question?
Yeah, thank you, Richardson. And I think if the question has something to do with the fail-safe and so forth, in the VMAT we have subgroups working on not only the fail-safe, but also the both the fail mode and normal mode of the safety is validated through documentation and so forth. As the Mr. Sanye mentions that there are almost impossible to foresee. So we have to consider a lot of situation or almost infinite situation. Therefore, as I explained earlier in my presentation, that we have adopted the multiple approach so that those failure mode can also be assessed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Onoda. And we still have some questions left in the Q&A chat function, but I would like to ask the speakers, the panelists of this part A of session 1 to maybe answer it via the Q&A chat function in writing. And we are now moving, and I'd like to thank my distinguished colleagues once again for the presentations. And you see from the questions from the floor that there is a high interest in all of the topics you have presented. But we are now moving to part B of session 1. Part B is about shaping the future in terms of standards and regulations for the digital future. It's moderated by Ian Yarnold, and Ian is from the United Kingdom, working for the Department for Transport, and I think Ian is very well known here, and he has a long history at the UNECE, especially in the area of active safety and intelligent transport, and he also led on the UK level the national activities on automated vehicles. 2 weeks ago, he was elected as chair of the administrative committee of the 1998 agreement of the WP29, and he is also co-chair of the ITS working group. And before I close my part here, my role here, I'd like to thank you for listening, for your interesting discussions and questions. And it was a pleasure for me to be here, but of course I will follow the part B of the session. So Ian, the floor goes to you.
Thank you very much, Richard. Can everyone hear me okay? Richard, can you hear me?
Yes, very good, Ian.
Okay, thanks very much indeed. Good afternoon, everyone. And let me congratulate Richard and the speakers in our first session for the excellent work that they've presented, and obviously for the progress that Richard is making under his GRVA group in trying to bring automated functionality, automated technologies to the mainstream vehicles around the world. Now, one of the challenges we find, and this is what we're going to discuss now, is this when we start to write regulations, whether they're UN regulations, global technical regulations, or national regulations, we're finding this word digital or systems of digital is becoming an important, possibly even a crucial aspect. Now you might ask, what do I mean by digital or digital technologies? And from my point of view, as a regulator, I'm worried about what are the different challenges that digital technologies present. And I think the issue there is that from my understanding, the vehicle regulations need to be more dynamic, much more dynamic than the traditional regulations regulating the traditional technologies, such as braking systems or steering systems or crash or glazing or tires, where we're very familiar. The automated technologies are quite different and will require, I think, different solutions in regulations so that we can be more dynamic and deliver what I think regulators need, what industry needs, and what society expects, much more so than over the last 70 years, where we've been working in the UNECE on internationally harmonized regulations. And this is the basis for this part of our session this afternoon. Hence the question, are the tried and trusted approaches to standards and regulations suitable for a digital future? Now, to help us consider this question, we have a range of and a group of global experts. You will have seen the programme and it's on screen in front of you. What I'm not going to do, as following Richard's lead, I'm not going to spend a lot of time introducing everyone. The plan is that we move through each of the presenters in the same way that Richard has done, and then at the end of that, we will come together hopefully for a short panel session where we can have a lively chat using the Q&A function. Now, our first speaker today is Duncan Kay. He's from the UK Department for Transport. In fact, he works in my team. He is an expert on vehicle regulations. He's been working in this area now for many, many years. He was the author of the UK Regulatory Review about 8 years ago on what we called then driverless cars, but of course now we use the word automated, and included the initial code of practice that we have in the UK. So Duncan, you're on first, then we follow up with Jus van Dam from ACEA. Duncan, thank you.
Thank you, Ian, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone out there. It's a pleasure to be talking on this important topic, and it's a good question that's been posed. And I've sort of thought about this question in the framework, continuing this morning's conversations around automated driving systems and self-driving vehicle technology in particular. And I think these vehicles represent a unique and unprecedented challenge for vehicle regulators, and I'd like to say it's a huge achievement that we have actually created our first type approval regulation that allows the automated lane keeping systems to come to market. But I think it's sort of widely recognized that there remain challenges to overcome in regulating more advanced and capable automated driving systems, operating in a wider range of situations, traffic situations. And I think there are three main areas where I think regulations will be challenging to create. So I'd like to talk through those three. The first, I think, is driving behavior. And this is really something that is new for vehicle regulators. We've been used to sort of specifying technical requirements for vehicles since the introduction of type approval, but specifying behaviors of vehicles is something a little different. We've created regulations for ADAS systems, which include certain requirements about the way they behave and they operate, but the driver's always in overall charge, overall responsibility for safety. But with level 4 and higher, level 4 plus autonomy, we need to create an approval system that's suitable for effectively an electronic driver or a chauffeur. So that's the first challenge. The second one is the interaction of these vehicles with their operating environment. And I think we need to take that into account. And that's, again, not something that has traditionally been done in type approval. Normally, the type approval regulation is focused on the vehicle itself. And the operating environment is generally the global road network. Once it's approved, it's allowed to travel anywhere it likes on the road network. And so indeed, the whole remit of our work at the UNECE is to create globally harmonized regulations. So how do we take into account the operating environment where that might be more specifically defined, and how do you regulate the combination of the vehicle and its environment? And the third point is artificial intelligence, or incorporating machine learning. Systems that can learn, adapt, evolve over time, hopefully to the benefit of road safety, and particularly systems that are able to share that learning across the fleet in a way that simply isn't possible with human drivers. We don't want to lose those benefits, but how does type approval as a process work, given that it's traditionally been a gateway to market, a fixed point in time, and an assessment of something which thereon has to remain the same. So if I talk through each of those three challenges a little more and the first one around driver behavior. Every conversation I've been involved with in regard of self-driving vehicles has at some point turned to the question of how safe is safe enough. And I still have yet to hear the definitive answer to that. And I think that's probably because there isn't one. It seems to me that instead of sort of endlessly debating the question, we need to take a pragmatic approach and start somewhere. After all, the rules around human driving behavior have evolved over the past 100 years. So why would it not be the case that we'd evolve something over time? Well, that's not to say that we take a laissez-faire approach. I think it's important as regulators that we do set standards in this area. And we can't just point to existing national highway codes written purely for human drivers, not least because some of the content isn't relevant. So we need to start thinking about what some people call a digital highway code that represents our consensus view on how automated driving systems should behave. And we've already started to research this in the UK. I would argue that these systems need to be exemplar drivers on our roads, driving like the best human drivers, or even better. We need to address road safety and the existing toll of death and injury on our roads and work to improve that. There are arguments that you shouldn't set the barrier too high and delay systems coming to market, but I think there's a balance to be struck. And I think this leads on to the next point about the operating environment. So there's an interaction between the vehicle and its environment. And it's easier to create a safe automated driving system if you create a very controlled environment for that system to operate in. Indeed, we've got examples of self-driving systems operating in closed environments for years now, very safely. Now you can't just redesign or reconfigure the entire road network to make things easier for self-driving technology, but there are things that can be done. And I think it's incumbent on type approval regulators to develop regulations that take this into account, this relationship between the vehicle and its operating environment. And this is a really important aspect and something that we need to develop a language so that we have a common language to describe these environments. And then moving on to my final point, conscious of time, artificial intelligence and machine learning. Whole books have been written about the difficulties of regulating artificial intelligence. But I think the point I'd like to make here is that we need to accept the reality of continuous learning and find smart ways to regulate it. We could just require that systems only learn during development, and then from an approval process onwards, they remain fixed, but then we lose the potential safety benefits of continuous learning and sharing of information that fleets might be able to benefit from. And instead of that, we could require some form of post-deployment monitoring and feedback from the vehicles to ensure that even as they learn and develop, we have some way of measuring what the impact of that is. And I think there are conversations around developing what are called leading metrics for indications if risky or unsafe behaviors are starting to be adopted. And if we can develop some metrics and agreed understanding of how to analyze that situation, then I think we could regulate in a smarter way that catches potential issues, but still allows for that learning to take place. And I think that's leads back to my final point, really, that we need to use this opportunity of these new technologies, new digital technologies, to engage in an improved way of talking about automotive safety, and have continuous learning and feedback from incidents that do occur on our road networks. At the moment, I think we don't learn enough from incidents that happen. And I think we could take this opportunity of these new technologies to really create a loop where we feed back the learning from incidents and use that to improve our regulations going forward. So I think, are standards and regulations suitable for the digital future? Well, that of course depends on what those standards and regulations are. But yes, I'd say that they are necessary, and provided we work together to ensure we regulate in a smart way that maintains safety without constraining innovation, then they're absolutely the right thing. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Duncan. I'm really grateful for your observations. Some real good ideas there, maybe for our discussion and our panel session a bit later on. I'm hoping that we'll have lots of questions on the chat as we proceed through the session. Now we move on to Just Van Ton. Just is a person that's appeared on this panel before various times. He's ACEA's, the Automotive Manufacturers Group in Brussels. He's their masterminder, expert on all things to do with ITS and automotive vehicles. Just, thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Do you hear me well, loud and clear? Okay,
Right.
perfect. You should see my slides in full screen. So first of all, thank you, Ian, for the nice introduction, and to all the colleagues in the panel. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, where you are in the world. That's the beauty of being digital. And one, congratulations to the both institutions, ITU, my former telecom friends. I worked quite a lot with ITU, and also UNECE, notably VP29, but also VP1. This is a joint exercise, which I liked. I used to be in Geneva Motor Show, unfortunately, without cars today and without show, but we give you a speech, and that might be a bit more boring, but at least more interactive, hopefully. I will be talking about a lot of things that actually Mr. Duncan Key was referring to, the digital future, or the digital reality, I would say today. Connected and automated are different animals. They are different things. They come together, they merge to some extent, and they might need each other. And I will give you some examples on this one. First, connectivity services. Vehicles are not independent products anymore. They interact with other vehicles, V2V. They interact with the infrastructure. It can be traffic lights, it can be roads, smart roads. It can be, we call it objects at the other side of the vehicle, which is then the traffic environment and the physical environment. But it's much more than that. We are part of an ecosystem that goes to mobility. Today, a car, truck, van, bus is part as a product of the mobility. Tomorrow, it's an element of a platform economy where a driver, professional or consumer, can actually choose his, I would say, a preferred method. It can be mobility as a service with cars. It can be transportation as a service for large commercial vehicles, distribution last mile, for example, for commerce in cities, and so on and so on. But it's much more than that. It's also having to do with safety. Obviously, as Mr. Lagrange from the Commission was referring to, we have a very extensive general safety regulation with a lot of implementing acts that will follow this year and next year, where we indeed have regulated quite in detail a number of active and passive safety systems. And it's also about security. When cars are being connected to other cars and to other objects, I have to say, and even people in the future, we will have a threat of security. That's why we do welcome very much the R155 on cybersecurity and 156 on software updates over the air. So it's part of a whole community that was not there before. In the past, cars did not interact physically, I would say, with the environment. Now they will. And it's not only about interaction for commercial purposes, such as insurance-based services or all kinds of other smart services, I would say. but it's also for road safety. It's for road safety, it is for traffic management, traffic efficiency. In Europe, we call it ITS, so Intelligent Transportation Services. And for Europe, there is a whole regulatory, I would say, overview of that. There's the ITS Framework Directive of 2010 with a lot of delegated acts. This is actually currently under review. And we have a number of use cases that we have defined and actually standardized, industry-led standardization for CITS, for cooperative ITS systems. This still needs to be legislated finally, but there is a good draft that has been done 2 years ago. Critical issues, since I'm talking to my telecom friends as well, and the electronic communications community, it's about interoperability. It's nice to have cars that can talk to other cars, but they should also be able to talk to other objects. So we need to talk first in the same language, with the same, at least the same metadata sets, yeah. And also we cannot hinder each other. Otherwise we would be collusion in the air, which in the cloud. So we need compatibility systems. We need systems that are compatible, that we can have a forward or a backward compatibility. That's still a discussion, but we have short range standards, we have long range technology, and all these ecosystems should actually be playing together. It's not an easy one, and we are discussing it right now in the CPT and also with the help of ETSI and ASEA friends. It's about how to use in a most efficient way and technology neutral way the gigahertz spectrum band, the 5.9 gigahertz spectrum. We have had discussions in Europe. This is solved now more or less in terms of review. We do have an issue, at least as European manufacturer, with the FCC noticed proposed rulemaking on the splitting off a number of frequencies there in the 5.9 for commercial purposes, so taking it away for vehicle-related safety purposes. Yeah. Another thing that we are considering very heavily is the 5G deployment. That's a no-brainer, but definitely it will increase our capillarity, our, I would say, increased need for connectivity. We have a number of interesting projects led by European funding in consortia. Some of them are led by Ertico. That's a partnership that does very well the ITS framework. Some others by other consortia, I would say. But this is reconfirmed by a digital compass. So last week, the Commission has adopted again a new paper that really gives a push for digital skills, digital government as well, e-government, but also digital, I would say, a rollout of networks, being it long-range 5G new radio. And CEF2 is a billion fund that has been adopted also last week, so it has been a busy week, where now the member states can put in their plans for, I would say, for recovery plans due to the COVID, but also for advanced rollout of 5G networks, and actually CAD, so connected and automated driving, is a big part of that. Next to that strategy on the connectivity and the frequency allocation and so on, we do have a very large digital and data strategy, which we embrace as European manufacturers of vehicles. We are very much favoring the cross-sectorial data framework. We do that actively today, and it goes to the edge. It's not only about cloud computing, but it will be, like some manufacturers have already announced, it will be computing at the edge, meaning at the source where the data are being collected from the sensors, cameras, and LiDARs. So this is about building European data spaces, about mobility data spaces, not only for vehicles, but the whole mobility ecosystem. It will be with roads, will be with transportation systems, with software providers, etc., etc. And as the previous speaker already hinted at, Duncan Kay, artificial intelligence. We expect a legislative proposal in April from the European Commission on this one. I can tell you we're not that pleased with the fact that automated driving is explicitly foreseen as a high risk, because we believe automated transport is a too big word. We need to narrow it down and to see what are we actually talking about. What is deep learning? What is big data? And what is then artificial intelligence? Because a lot of artificial intelligence is already active today in ADAS systems. So that's a framework that we're gonna see very soon and gonna discuss with the stakeholders. And finally, the cybersecurity framework, of course, and the software updates around this. When I talk about vehicles that are interacting with others, vehicles today and my OEMs in Europe, they actively share data for all kinds of use cases. It can be safety-related use cases where even we have a data task force with the member states and the road authorities. But there is also other use cases in the insurance sector, in the repair and maintenance sector, All that is being handled by my European OEMs through one standard that has been developed, or actually two standards, by the ISO. It's the extended vehicle standards. There's one thing we definitely do not want, that our product is becoming part of a data ecosystem, meaning that third parties could actually use our product to be intrusive and to put malicious software or all kinds of other things. You do not want to drive in a car where somebody can take over your steering function or braking function or whatever function. And unfortunately, through the OBD2 port, that is already being demonstrated, unfortunately. So we've taken the approach of bringing the data out of the vehicle in a cloud system or another way. And from that point, that is a secure area for OEMs to send these data to third parties, being insurance company, repair and maintenance, or for ourselves. So this is our principles: fair competition, taking into account data protection, of course, privacy, and also return on investment. That's an important one. We built these things with our suppliers. There's no free lunch for nobody on this one. Yeah. Now, this is about connected driving. Now, coming back a bit to the agenda of today, which is more about automated driving. Where do we go? Well, I talked about the digital component for automated driving. We need data capturing from the environment, from the collective perception environment. These automated vehicles with steering, braking, acceleration functions, and whatever, they need to make an intelligent decision. It will be up to the OEM with the suppliers to dictate more or less the physical car system, how to behave in a certain environment, in a certain ODD. So that is based on data capturing that we put in our HD maps and then actionate some of the functions, I would say. Now, this is easier said than done. We have different data sets. We don't have standardization on this one yet, not even on the metadata sets. So there is still a lot of work ahead of us. And there's the other side of the equation. It's not only about roads, it's about infrastructure, physical and digital infrastructure. So we need digital twins of the physical infrastructure. So is there a gap? I think we have a gap, and that's why we have 4 days of discussion this week. ALKS, excellent, very good. So we worked that very, very hard with all of you, but it's not enough. You know, the German proposal, which we very much favor, it's increased to 130 kilometers to have also allowed lane changes and so on. ACSF is providing hands-off warnings, acoustic, for example, but actually a true level 3 hands-off and eyes-off situation is actually not possible, because after a certain number of seconds, the car needs to go in his normal driving function mode where the driver is really in charge. Yeah. So we have an issue, and that's why we always have these groups. How do we cope with unintended use? What is a safe use? What is a safe behavior of the driver when being in an automated modus? Yeah. What's the level of trust and acceptance? So that's one bucket of work that is actually the core of UNECE, and we really want this indeed to take place in VP29, so that in Europe we can approximate this very quickly into a European type approval regulations. Secondly is the traffic rules. In Europe, if I go to Finland, I can actually drive autonomously in level 5. There is a law allowing this. Germany has had, 2 years ago, I believe, a change in the traffic legislation to allow high levels of automated driving. We don't see that in every country. So we would like to see some more harmonization. Maybe it's too ideal to have harmonization, but at least synchronization. What kind of level is applicable in what kind of country and what is allowed? And also, we would like to see digital twinning of traffic rules. It would be nice to have in our HD maps for automated driving the digital copy paste, I would say, of the traffic rule that is applicable in a certain segment of the area. And finally, we need also to check how do we treat offenses. So when a car drives too quickly, I don't know if it happens in an automated driving context. I know the UK Law Commission, Ian, I think you were also part of that from the ministry, did an excellent consultation document. And together with our colleagues of the SMMT, you will read our very detailed replies with thanks to the SMMT colleagues, my friends in London. There's another gap, that's the road infrastructure. Hasn't been touched upon quite detailed today. But these intelligent cars, automated cars and vehicles, they need to detect the lane markings, the road signs, the speed limits. ISA is a good interplay, for example. So also for that one, we would need digital copies, digital twins. And actually today we are discussing within ASEA and CEDAR and ASICAP, so the European Associations for the Road Community, with the road operators, the road agencies, we are discussing really how that should be taking place and how should be the refreshing of the physical environment. So it will be a consistency that we need between onboard applications, onboard actually activation of systems, and offboard reading of the environment. And finally, urban mobility. We haven't discussed this yet, but it's not only about highways and platooning, for example, on highways, but try to do that in an urban context with so many, I would say, unforeseen events that can happen. So, and finally, very much the intervention of the FIA president, so the user. It's not only about how to teach the user, how to maybe review the driving license requirements, but how to make him a trustworthy client. And not only a consumer, but also the professional client. And that's still a way to go for everybody. I see what the United States are doing with the ADAS demystification program. We're doing the same in Europe, but also automated driving is not ADAS. It's not ACC. It's really the car is driving you and the truck is driving the driver. So there, we still need some gaps there to solve on skills, on trust, on AI, and actually using the digital environment into a physical car, I would say. Yeah. So I will not repeat all this, Ian. This is also what you discussed in your daily job, but definitely the validation, the multi-pillar approach that we have in UN, very much favored by OICA and all of us. So we welcome really to continue to work together and make it happen very strongly, but also very quickly, because we need to keep our competitiveness of not only the European industry, but the global industry. So we need certification, validation that is written in either guidelines or regulations. We can discuss on this, but at least something that goes quite quickly, but is safe and secure enough to build my OEMs to build these vehicles for the future. This being said, what we have to do is work with the environment, not only building the best vehicles, the less emitting ones, but integrate them into the, I would say, into the context. Secondly, digital infrastructure. That's the telecommunication guys, the mobile network operators, satellite operators. It's about coverage, 4G, solving the issue with eCall, for example, when the 2G, 3G switches off. What do we do when these in-band modems are still there in our cars in the legacy fleet? It's about continuity cross-border. A network doesn't stop at the border, at least the cars do not stop at the border, but the mobile network does stop at the border. It roams on another network, on somebody else's network. So we need a millisecond handover if we want to rely on safety-related, let's say, digital connectivity. The physical infrastructure, I talked about this, readability and the digital twins. And finally, the audience I have here in front of me, legislators and regulators. Yeah, we need to see where is the best fit between, I would say, ex ante legislative approach and more ex post checking of safety requirements that OEMs would put on the market. And finally, the users, of course, our drivers, our users of mobility, not only cars, but actually the mobility system. We definitely need a good demystification. What is connected, cooperated automation, and what is it not? What is ADAS? What is it not? What is autopilot? What is assisted pilot, etc. With this, I think I've talked too much. Ian, back to you, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks very much. This excellent presentation, real source of food for thought, I guess, for our Q&A session. I'm grateful for you covering such a wide range of issues. So now we're going to move on to William Gauss, or Bill Gauss. As you'll have seen from his bio on the website, he's the director of the Federal Program Development within SAE International. He's based in Washington, and I'm grateful that he's found time today to join us. So Bill, are you able to share your thoughts on the question? Thank you.
And thank you very much, Ian. I really appreciate that. It's a privilege and a real pleasure to participate in this. And I'm, of course, saddened that there's no motor show to go enjoy and to mingle with folks on this. And I'm glad to see the slide up here is being shown. I just have one little slide to talk about, and that is to sort of set a perspective of the current situation. This is how standards are currently done, but it is also modern. It's not too traditional. And I'm going to step through it briefly. A bunch of probably overworked volunteers come together And I see a lot of them as attendees here today that have dedicated a tremendous amount of effort and technical capabilities to producing these standards. They get together in various topics. Sometimes the topics didn't even exist prior to when they come through them, such as the field of micromobility. Didn't even know what to call them, but a group was formed and they came through and they did it voluntarily based on some motivation. The motivation in the beginning of SAE was on safety and productivity, and it's pretty much still the motivation in a non-competitive manner. And inputs, whether they be a heavy goods vehicle manufacturer, micromobility, bus coach, or they're specialists in certain cross-cutting areas such as systems engineering or hardware in the loop, or whatever. Or some groups come together as consortia or cooperative research or funded programs and work on a standard in an uncompetitive manner. And perhaps we can talk about in the panel some more, but safety is highly competitive. So there's a balance in there. And then the standards, and this slide just shows that they go support various national or local legislations, and they support the UN WP29, the ITC, WP1. The standards are shared with ISO, IEEE, other SDOs, and they ultimately go into GTRs or regional North America regs or the 58 agreement perhaps, and they get into product, of course. I want to say that they're consensus and they're voluntary. So not only is participation voluntary by the experts, the adoption is voluntary. However, it still is a very good practice to follow them. And I think that may be another point in the panel discussion of what is a policy of a good practice versus something that may or not be in a regulation. And the last thing I want to say is the time. And I think back to a very highly competitive project I was privileged to lead, which is about 22 years ago. And that was with a heavy goods vehicle, and it was called roll stability control. We actually took control of the driver away at the point when the vehicle's onboard technology considered that this combination heavy goods vehicle might roll over. And we took control over momentarily. It may have seemed like an eternity to a driver back then, a second or two where the machine took control over the driver's ability to steer and deliver fuel and brake, all three functions, and on the tractor, on the power unit, and on the braking of the trailer behind. To put that in perspective, it took about 4 years to develop that, to validate it, to use the term used in our VMAT group, to validate it. There were no regulations in place other than the brilliant Motor Vehicle Safety Act that said, regardless of what regulations are in place, the product better be safe. It took about 4 years. Back then, a gigabyte of data cost €1,000. That was about the time frame I started when the euro came into being. So to put it in perspective, right now, from a metric perspective, an I just looked Friday, the average time from inception of work in progress to a published standard for the heavy truck group is about 13 months at SAE. And that's still an eternity when I think of, I probably can't even count the number of software updates I'm offered on my iPad in 13 months. I want to close with that. The difference of a 4-year development from perhaps some people might consider something very trivial 20 years ago of a stability control system, with data costing me then €1,000 a gig, and my boss thinking I was out of my mind. What do you need that much data for? Data collection for? We were doing development work. and then now. So thank you, Ian, for this privilege, and I look forward to a lively discussion.
Thanks very much, Bill. Yeah, I look forward to a lively discussion as well. I think good points, especially around the comparison with computer software updates, and how that's going to fit into an automotive world. So we're now going to move straight on to our next presentation, and this time we're going to stick with North America. And I'm very pleased to be able to introduce Sem Hatipoglu from NHTSA. His biography is on the website as well. He's the Associate Administrator on Vehicle Safety Research. So from my experience over the years, that always meant something really, really important to me when I dealt with people who were Associate Administrator in NHTSA. But anyway, Sam, you're very welcome. It's great to see you here. So maybe you can share your thoughts on the question as well. Thank you. Sam.
Thank you, Ian. Hopefully you guys can hear me.
Yep.
All right, great. First of all, thank you again for inviting us. And this is a very interesting topic area. I am Cem Hatipoglu. I'm not sure that I am important as Ian mentioned, but I have the privilege to run the Vehicle Safety Research Program at National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. For those of you who may not know us well, we are the safety oversight agency for motor vehicles and motor vehicle equipment within the US. We heard quite a bit about the type approval model, again, without going into too much details, and know that I'm a researcher. The researcher's view of self-certification is basically there are a finite number of federal motor vehicle safety standards, about 60 or so. So all manufacturers need to meet them, but as long as they meet them, they can introduce a new technology in the US. But there is, what makes this model work well is the very strong enforcement authority that is coupled with it. Basically, there's a compliance angle to it. Basically, everyone needs to meet the set standards, but there's also a defect angle, which is, in addition to meeting all the standards, everybody needs to design systems free of unreasonable safety risks. This is a very broad enforcement authority, basically says that they should know better and do better and not take unreasonable risks. Again, it is a trust but check model. I would say type approval, again, a researcher's viewpoint is check but then trust kind of a model. There's a trust in the process as well as the manufacturers at some point in time. Again, as I will start, maybe I'm not going to go too much into details on very specific technologies necessarily in my initial address. It's thinking about, again, digital future of the primary purpose of this kind of panel. One angle is that digital future has been creeping up on us for a while now. Software, what are the elements of it? Software has been introduced in the motor vehicles since 1970s, initially by the engine controls, growing over time, no question. And it has made motor vehicles one of the most complex software-driven consumer products in the market. Complexity isn't something that I would necessarily think anyone would be proud of, but it is a side effect of many features that are put in complex supply chain. Then there's connectivity. Again, there are many flavors of it. One thing that I will mention through my initial address is that we can do a lot better collectively in being clear about when we say something, what we mean by connectivity, what we mean by automated driving. But generally, forms of connectivity, whether it's cellular, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, have been in the market, introduced in the market since early 2000s, I would say. Electrification is another element of digital future that has been mass, electrification started in the 2000s. And automated driving, again, there's a huge spectrum of different technologies with different considerations, different concerns. But elements of adaptive cruise control, lower levels of driving automation has been out there in the market for decades with level 2 systems available for multiple years now. One thing is that I would say it's not that digital future is necessarily something to happen in the future. So it has been here to some extent. But I would admit that complexity of these systems and how we need to analyze them and what kind of knowledge we need to build around them has been becoming more and more challenging. But the corollary of, I think, digital future being introduced in pieces so far is that I would say it kind of implies that the tools we've been using have been okay, at least to some extent, with the introduction of digitalization. Again, the core of digital future is that lies the data. And with data comes various different considerations. I think many of my colleagues already mentioned. There's a cybersecurity aspect to it. There's opportunities, of course, the functionality. You don't bring in software and all of these things to just create challenges to the world. The purpose of it is to do something good, and most of the modern vehicles have a lot of safety features in it. And the advent of like highly automated driving systems tries to do more of that, try to address the human mistakes and errors and poor choices. These are all great, but the other aspects of it, when you have the other side of the medal that we need to take care of or think of. And along with safety and cybersecurity, there are also very complex considerations come into play that I think makes it even more complicated to be able to, in isolation, address. Those are data ownership, privacy, intellectual property, competitiveness, all of that. So at the very highest levels of, I think, how a new technology introduction takes place, whether you're a developer, a safety oversight authority, or a member of the public, the main considerations are all about risk. How do you define the risk? How do you measure the risk? How do you find a baseline for that risk? And how do you determine what public's acceptance of that risk might be? And how do you, if you actually figure those out, then the goal could be how do you set objective performance standards and some objective tests that will target trying to get that level of performance from these systems. And maybe at those levels, if you think about considerations, like digitalization has limited impact on the impact of the process. However, administering those processes have definitely not in the order of how you would apply them to earlier technologies. There are very complex interplays between different pieces of systems, and many of the recent issues came from really those complex interactions, the publicly visible ones. How do you ensure that you have a reasonable coverage of the overall safety elements is a major area, and how do you support that? And there are also complex, what I would say with the advent of automated driving, especially at the lower end, complex considerations in systems performance and a human performance, and how do you build trust but also avoid complacency? So the traditional ways of thinking of crash avoidance has been like we set standards, we then try to up the game and make those systems perform better. And that generally worked well because you're basically continually improving the functionality. Well, with automated driving, making necessarily or lower levels of driving, that model or approach or thought process may or may not be the best in the overall. So we need to build knowledge. I can't say that it is, I can't say that it isn't. It's just a matter that we need to consider the overall safety impacts when we're looking at basically what the tool sets are, what the questions are. Above all, I think the digitization's biggest impact on what I would consider as a cybersecurity. This is not new. It came with software, realization around it, and there's an inflection point with the introduction of connectivity because it ups the risk considerations extraordinarily. But it is a different type of a risk assessment from the traditional methods, because it is a human mind against human mind kind of a concept, as opposed to, I think, most of the safety considerations look at human mind designers against natural failures. Probabilistic approaches can help, but how you define risk and how you design process improvements to account for it is very critical. And cybersecurity could become the Achilles heel for many of these technologies. And we have to be very prudent about how we capture the expectations around it, how we imply what should or shouldn't be, and because it is really not, it is critical that we get those right, and building the knowledge around them and not rushing to solutions is very important in that respect. Again, connectivity for purposes of using it for warnings and the security needs to be able to do vehicle influence or behavior influence through aggregated information. Those are not even in the same ballpark of, I think, safety risk considerations. Bottom line, it's the bottom question, the top line question of this panel is, do the existing tool sets work? And I would say at the very, almost always an engineer's and a lawyer's answer is it depends. And I think I will pose the same. The first thing is, do we really define the problems properly? Or are we starting with solutions or tools trying to kind of resolve an issue? And the second part is, are those, are motivations mapping the actions that we're exploring? Again, from my experience and in the way that we're exploring the scientific foundation to be able to enable informed decisions, you can aim or target something, and that may be a perception, and you try to solve the perception. You could actually may not influence the behavior or the outcomes the way that you hope to. And in my side, my biggest recommendation to my team is to spend more time on formulating the questions and identifying the safety problem, and then designing research findings around that to make us, help us make informed decisions. I can tell you what helps. I can't tell you whether it's, whether those tools are sufficient or not. What I would say is we should always be assessing whether tools are sufficient, but also are they still the right tools? Like, just because a tool works doesn't necessarily mean it's the best and most practicable and most efficient. It's not just digitization context. It has to be an ongoing process to assess the tools as well as what we're trying to achieve. But it does help to stay at the performance levels to be compatible. And it does also help that we stay at the system level to the extent that we can. And being clear and specifying exactly what we're trying to solve does help. And at the end of the day, it's the science and facts and research. Not surprising coming from a researcher side of the business. But when you have data and you support, the outcomes are, or what tools to use and in what manner you use, are not really that complicated. It is the process of finding the right questions to ask. And of course, we're never going to have the full picture. The point of it is, what are the most impactful questions that we can ask? Automated driving, full spectrum, the questions are different. Level 2, level 3, and level 4, 5, I would pose that you can't solve with the same mindset of the same type of questions. And the other thing that I will close my opening remarks by saying that at the end of the day, I will remind that we need to keep our eyes on the overall objective, which is, I think collectively, everyone here, our primary interest is to improve roadway safety, not to necessarily target one technology or another, not to, it is about being mindful and in however many ways that we can actually help improve and we need to be able to objectively isolate the impacts of various different technologies. And to that end, our objective, I think it's very important to critically think about all these different challenges. At the same time, we need to tie everything back to how do we impact safety. And I think we're doing that, but again, technology, as it's out there, as we contemplated, I want us to remind that it's not all about challenges. Obviously, the main purpose of a technology is that it enables a lot of safety improvements. And I would be very comfortable projecting that everyone on this call in this panel and on audience, if asked, I'm pretty sure they will say they would feel more comfortable in a modern vehicle, comfortable in terms of safety, than a 1950s vehicle, even though there's very little or no digital imprint on that type of vehicle is, because we need to think holistically and collectively work on this. Thank you, Ian. That's all I have.
Lovely. Thanks, Ian. So yeah, you made me stop and think about 1950s vehicles then, but also this issue of road safety, and you gave me a very neat segue. So thanks very much indeed for your observations on it. And it's great to have someone with your kind of experience on the research activities to bring into our discussion. So I'm going to move straight on to our next speaker, who's David Ward. Many of you will know David. He's a road safety advocate. He's president of the Towards Zero Foundation. Again, his biography is on the website. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to David, who's going to tell us all about the public acceptance of risk maybe and what they will and won't accept. Anyway, David, thank you.
There we go. Sorry about that. It took me a moment to get my myself unmuted. Can everybody hear me?
Yep, we're fine.
Yeah, great. So thanks very much, Ian, for the introduction and the opportunity to speak to you all. And like everyone else, good morning, good evening, and wherever you all are. I wanted to start just by, I was very struck by the opening question about tried and trusted regs and how they can keep vehicles safe in a digital age or digital future. And I guess the first question I want to ask is, just let's be clear what has been tried and what has been trusted. And I think if you look back over the last 40 years, the winning formula for improved vehicle safety has been a rather unique combination of regulatory push on the one hand and demand pull on the other. And the two together have generated extraordinary innovation on the part of the industry to achieve really huge improvements. And the regulatory push side is obviously type approval or self-certification, and it's also the market surveillance mechanisms, whether it's conformity of production, recall, and so on. But on the demand side of the story, consumer ratings have been very, very powerful, mainly through new car assessment programs, with of course NHTSA establishing the first one 41 years ago. And NCAPs have really been extremely important in creating a market for safety, building consumer confidence and trust. And they've done that through this unique mechanism of creating a competitive environment where manufacturers actually perform far better than regulations and often very faster. They've made progress faster than required by regulations. And then at the same time, they've given consumers confidence and an incentive to buy the safest vehicles they can afford. So I think when we look at the question, what has been tried and trusted, I want to put the NCAPs into that mix, because I think they've been at least 50% of the story. And so we mustn't forget that. It's already been mentioned in a way, but there's this arms control maxim, trust but verify. I think NCAPs in a way reverse that. The mantra, if you like, is verification builds trust. And of course, the reality is that after Dieselgate in the automotive sector, trust has taken a terrible knock, and that trust loss not just affected certain OEMs, the industry as a whole, but it also affected the regulatory system. So I think we have to recognize that there's some way to go, even though that experience is now getting a few years back. But nevertheless, it's a background that one has to take seriously. And of course, also in the world of digital commerce, let's just say trust isn't necessarily the word that springs to mind about some of the major operators in that sector. So I think there's a lot to be done to work very hard on building trust, which ultimately is building the consumer confidence that will create a market. So I think it's everything that regulators do, I think they need to bear that in mind. And I think there are still some important actions that need to be taken, which are about how we frame the whole discussion. And I'm afraid I can't appear at any of these sort of events without warning about the hype around automotive vehicles, and particularly the use of the very misleading cliche that 95% of crashes are caused by driver error. And then in particular, the problem is that that is then used to make a very big leap, a reductionist claim that AVs can somehow eliminate the bulk of those crashes. That's simply wrong. And actually, even if you look at the original studies that back up the claims of 95%, including, for instance, the UNECE one from a few years back, they don't actually say that driver error causes 95%. They say driver error is the last in a causal chain. And in fact, the problem with all that, it understates problems of perhaps latent mistakes in infrastructure or in vehicles. So I think it's very unhelpful because it creates expectations that are really unrealizable. So I think we've really got to eliminate that. I mean, just as an aside, I don't mean this in a particularly critical way, but ITU was suggesting some tweet messages for speakers, and they included the 90%. So please try and stop doing that, everybody. I don't think it helps. The case for AVs will be much more effectively built, I think, bottom up, sort of vehicle by vehicle, usage by usage. And I think there you can actually build a much more convincing case. The other trust issue, which is crucial, and it has been sort of mentioned a bit, is avoiding what Lisa Dixon rather creatively has called autono washing, which is the problem of misleading marketing of systems that are far from fully automated. And we see that continuing the problems, for example, with the confusion around Tesla's use of autopilot and others. And so I think there's a growing consensus now that we've got to establish very clear definitions of what we mean. Euro NCAP and BAST and others are trying to establish a much clearer definition of being clear what we mean by assisted, automated, where the driver is still always going to have some engagement required, and autonomous. And I think we've really got to work hard to to blow away the confusion around all of that. The final issue, which is a very tricky one, and I think all the speakers have sort of referred to this, is the whole issue of access to data and how we exploit the big data opportunities that are coming. And of course, there are going to be huge public benefits from having wider access to all of that data, whether it's for crash investigation and safety research, for ongoing market surveillance, particularly in the environment where updates are going to be over the air online, and the vehicle you originally type approve or certify, its fundamental characteristics are going to change over a number of years due to those kind of updates. And it poses very interesting challenges, maybe opportunities for NCAPs. The model that NCAPs have used have been a little bit like an NCAP sort of process where you star rate at the beginning of the vehicle's life, and then you more or less leave it to the consumer in the market to make up their mind. I think a big opportunity for NCAPs is something that will happen already, is we will start to move towards what I would call dynamic whole model life ratings, where once a vehicle has, let's say, a 5-star rating, over a whole period of years, in principle, it'll be possible to track the entire sort of life story of that model in terms of its performance in safety. Of course, the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety in the US is already doing this through the FARS data, and they have a death rating per model. So in a way, it's just an extension of that. But I think that's the kind of direction that NCAPs will be going. So I think this issue of access to data is going to be very, very critical. It's always difficult. There's always a struggle over this. 25 years ago, I remember big arguments about open access to onboard diagnostic data, with the industry taking one position and the independent repairers and others taking another. I think we've got to try and find a sort of enlightened way to sort this out. tracking both, covering both the safety and security issues. And I think what I would call this enlightenment approach is much preferable to the risk of conflict or neglect, where some future crisis may cause extraordinary reputational damage to the industry or regulators. So I think we've got to find paths towards that. Recently, I've seen an interesting proposal produced by DECRA, and they've been talking about a system where data would be transferred from telecoms providers to independent trust center that could be maybe licensed by public authorities, that they could then provide data to legitimate stakeholders. And I think a model, some sort of model like that, is maybe something that we're all going to need. In the end, we need a commitment to transparency, not necessarily transparency meaning free for all for data, transparency in the sense that the model under which it's managed is completely clear and understood and properly managed from a point of view of safety and security. And I think that's going to be a big challenge for everybody. And so to come back to the first question, my answer is a sort of conditional yes. The tried and trusted approach has worked very well. And I think it can work, continue to work very well, but we've got to keep this consumer dimension, which NCAPs have represented, this market building dimension. And we've got to have a principle to a kind of enlightened transparency whilst preserving security, privacy, and so on. Anyway, that's my initial contribution. Thanks very much for the opportunity.
Thanks very much, David. That was great. I can see one or two questions coming in. I can't quite work out whether they're still relating to the previous part of the session under Richard Dam. But while I'm reading those through, let me kick off with a question to you, David, and others on the panel. The thing about this question of data. I remember Justin and Tom saying that manufacturers are going to start taking the data off of the vehicle so that the vehicle doesn't become, in essence, a target, I guess, for cybersecurity. And I wonder, how do we ensure that those communication protocols are secure? Because if you're taking the data off, someone could intercept it in that way. So I don't know whether Just can talk about that maybe, or even Sam from your experience. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for the good question. Hope you hear me, Ian. So indeed, the extended vehicle model is the only living model, I would say, applied worldwide. And what we do is we bring the data either directly outside the vehicle, or for time critical purposes, it can be a direct communication as well. But it goes through cellular communication, probably 4G today, and 5G test spectrum. So that 4G channel indeed is going from the vehicle directly, sensors, cameras, lidars, and all kinds of systems, to the back offices, so the back ends of the OEMs. Yeah, and from that point, it's being a channel. So that is the responsibility of the OEM, to bring it from the vehicle to its own cloud, and from that point, it's being dispatched to, can be third parties, can be neutral servers, can be platforms, can be all kinds of things. And so that will be important, especially for 5G, when we talk about cybersecurity of the 5G ecosystem. The Commission is doing quite a lot there with some roadmaps. We will indeed heavily depend on these communication networks, on these telecommunication technologies, the same as short range, by the way. So that's why for CITS, the whole system was secured end to end in terms of authentication of the messages, who is sending what kind of message to who, and has it not been changed in the middle of the sending, I would say. Yeah. So that's where we are today.
Great. Okay, thanks a lot, Sam. Sorry, just Sam, what do you think?
You know, I'm not going to comment on exactly how you do it safe, but I can talk about like cybersecurity considerations around data connectivity on the vehicle. Has to consider the security of the connection, but also like other ways that people can leverage it. The point of it is the mechanism itself isn't the only way. That, again, cybersecurity considerations, human mind against human mind concept is not just through securing the intended purpose, but also considering all the risks around someone else using it in different ways. And the only, I will point out that there's one recall that happened in 2015 the manufacturer did not have an over-the-air update capability, but had the pieces together that someone could stitch together and basically create a challenge, a risk that ended up being an unreasonable risk to public. So it is hard to kind of just say what would be adequate, but it would need to consider risks very broadly, not just in terms of how you like authenticate the communications to be able to facilitate. And it also, like, the risk becomes a different consideration for what purpose. Is it what kind of access, what kind of ECUs you can, and all the protections that are put around that. Like, can you do that in driving? Is that a software item? Can someone make it look like you're driving? So cybersecurity is a really, really interesting area, and it can become, again, the Achilles heel for a lot of technology solutions that needs to be done very comprehensively, like in terms of assessing the risk.
Thanks very much, Sam. Thanks very much. I just want to move on to another question, which was raised by David Ward. Is this issue about, you know, we talked about, and I think in the first session, we talked a lot about type approval. I think Sam and I think Jane Doherty mentioned self-certification. We have two fundamentally different approaches around the world. But then David Ward introduced this third idea about how does NCAP sit in this group? So is it a triumvirate? You've got three different things going on, and how do we make sure that as regulators and standard setters that we build that in? And I wonder whether Bill Gauss had a view on that. You're a standards guy. Well, you got any thoughts on that? And maybe even Duncan Kay. And I'm conscious we're running out of time, so I might have to apply guillotine. Thank you. So you got a minute, Bill.
Oh, thanks for the minute. Well, here in the U.S., the manufacturers spend a tremendous amount of effort achieving the highest levels, 5-star, boom, boom, boom. But I want to throw a different perspective in. There are probably suppliers in this new tech area that don't know what NCAP is. Don't even have a clue. Never heard of it. Don't know what it is. Don't know why it's important. And how do you fold them into that, into an unregulated voluntary area so quickly? I told you, Ian, when we chatted before, I don't have any answers. I have questions.
I could throw my 3 pennies in, as they say, but I won't. I wonder whether Duncan Kay and any thoughts for our final contribution, because we do have to wrap up in a moment. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good question. I hope you can hear me. Yeah, I think David explained the sort of different roles that NCAP and in particular and regulations have played, and explained that very well, the sort of pull and push. So I see that as something that's important to continue. Standards and NCAP can evolve quickly and react and can pull things up and create levels above, give space almost for regulators to then move the minimum bar upwards in following that process.
Okay. Sorry, we are at our deadline now, and I think I'm obliged to call a halt to it. It's now the end of the session, and I see a comment, a Q&A about the quality of my audio. I'm terribly sorry. For some strange reason, my headphones wouldn't work this morning, and I decided to use the laptop audio instead. But I've heard everyone else okay, so I hope you've been able to hear me, or at least most people have. Let me say thank you to everyone for their participation in the event. Also, thank you to the organisers, the ITU, and to UNECE. I found it a great event. I'm sure everyone else has as well. Now, I don't know if I need to hand back to anyone in the Secretariat or in the ITU. If I do, then just Stefano. I hand back to you. Thank you.
That's okay. So thank you very much, Jan, and the whole panelists who spoke today. Ladies and gentlemen, the first day of the symposium has successfully concluded. I'm reminding you all that the symposium continues tomorrow, 23 March, from 13 to 16 CET, as today. Another very interesting session will focus on the cybersecurity framework for connected vehicle. It will be moderated by a true expert on the topic and also a very good friend, Mr. Michael Sena. Please remember to register for tomorrow's session, as today's registration won't enable you to join tomorrow. This is very important. So thank you all for joining today, and see you tomorrow. Thank you very much.